So I have this tendency when I hear a quote or read a quote to jot it down. And the one I want to share with you this morning, I didn't note the attribution, so I don't know who said it. I Googled it and it didn't come up. So I apologize for not being able to attribute the quote, but it goes like this. Quote, "The suffering we feel is rooted in how tangled up we are. The tangle is all the ways we bind ourselves up in our fears, our unhelpful stories, and our self-created clouds of confusion." End quote. Again, the suffering we feel is rooted in how tangled up we are. The tangle is all the ways we bind ourselves up in our fears, our unhelpful stories, and our self-created clouds of confusion. And much suffering, particularly, we talked about this last night for those of you that were there, particularly at a feeling or an emotional level, in Buddhist terms, is not alone an inherent condition of existence. Rather, it is primarily a consequence of how we relate to the world and to ourselves. Our human minds, I don't need to tell you, are intricate and profound and have a tendency to weave themselves into a tangle. And I love this metaphor of the tangle because it really vividly depicts what we do in our experience. I often, with myself, use this, when I notice I'm suffering, I'll often remind myself, I'm getting all tangled up in this situation, because it just feels like that. It feels like I'm all wrapped up in gauze or something. And what I mean by that is this web of fears and unhelpful stories and the self-created confusion that I just described. And these tangles, or this tangle, binds us. It distorts our perception of reality, and it perpetuates our suffering. And the tangle quote, really serves as an important reminder of this truth. And it offers insight, or it offers an opening for how we might unravel the knots that keep us tangled and trapped. In Buddhist teaching, suffering, dukkha, is understood as a central theme of human life. And he identified its origins in the second noble truth, which points to tanha, or craving, as the root cause. Yet underlying craving is often something deeper, that being the tangle of our minds. And at the heart of these entanglements lies one of the three poisons, that being ignorance. Because ignorance, as the Buddha described it, it obscures our understanding of reality. And it leads us to create attachments, aversions, and delusions. And those are the threads, to stay with the metaphor, those are the threads that form the knots of our tangles, the knots of our suffering. So certain fears, for example, are one of the most potent threads in this tangle. Such as the fear that arises when we resist the uncertainty of life, when we resist the impermanence that is intrinsic to life. That's where we can get really tangled, because we cling to security. We cling to the illusion of control and to the hope that we can somehow shield ourselves, protect ourselves from pain and loss. But we know when we really think about it, that life is inherently unpredictable. And the more we resist this truth, the tighter the knot of entanglement and the knot of fear becomes. And again, this fear distorts our thinking, and it leads us to act out of self-preservation, which often involves avoidance rather than compassion and wisdom and understanding. It clouds our ability to see clearly, and this binds us to a cycle of reactive behavior that just deepens our suffering. And then there's these unhelpful stories that we tell ourselves. Narratives about who we are, about who others are, about how the world operates, about how the world should operate. And of course, these stories originate from our past experience, from our conditioning, and from our own insecurities. We may tell ourselves things like, I'm not good enough, or the world is against me, or I'll only be happy if I achieve X or Y. And these stories, when we engage them, solidify this false sense of self. It reinforces the ego and all of its desires. And when reality does not conform to this narrative or these narratives, then we feel frustration, we feel disappointment, we feel despair, all forms of suffering. But the stories themselves are simply illusions. They are mental fabrications that we cling to out of habit or the fear of letting go. And when we do this, we tighten the tangle. We obscure the path to freedom. And then finally, there's the self-created confusion that I referred to a moment ago. This endless mental chatter, the doubts, the conflicting emotions that only cloud our minds. And this confusion arises when we become entangled in attachments and aversions, when we are unable to discern the true nature of things. Rather than seeing reality as it is, as impermanent, as interconnected, as ever-changing, we instead project our desires, our wishes, and our fears onto it. And what does this distorted perception or these distorted perceptions do? They lead us to make poor decisions. They lead us to unnecessary suffering, and they lead us to further entanglement. It is as though we're wandering through a fog of our own making, searching for clarity, but unable to find it because we refuse to let go of the very thoughts and beliefs that generate the fog. Let me say that again, because this is really critical to today's topic. It is as though we are wandering through a fog of our own making, searching for clarity that doesn't exist, but unable to find it because we refuse to let go of the thoughts and beliefs that generate the fog in the first place. Now, all that being said, the good news, however, is that these tangles are not permanent. In our practice, we are offered tools to untie the knots and free ourselves from suffering. The Eightfold Path, for example, gives us a step-by-step roadmap, a step-by-step guide to cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. So through mindfulness, for instance, we learn to observe our fears, our stories, and the confusion, just watching them without becoming all entangled in them. By practicing meditation, we develop greater clarity. We develop stillness needed to see through these illusions. And with compassion and loving kindness, we soften the grip of the ego. We don't feel as invested in protecting it and defending it and aggrandizing it all the time. We open ourselves up to the interconnectedness of everything. Now, one of the most powerful practices for untangling the mind is the cultivation of insight meditation, because in this practice we learn to observe our thoughts, our emotions, and our sensations with equanimity, recognizing them as impermanent, not as the truth with a capital T. When certain fears arise, we don't push them away, but we investigate them with curiosity. What is this fear? Where is it coming from? What's going on? Is it based on reality? Or is it a projection of my mind? Is it a manufactured fear? Similarly, when unhelpful stories surface, which they do a lot, we can question their validity and we can choose not to identify with them. We don't have to believe everything we think. We don't have to identify with our stories, particularly the ones about ourselves. Now, all of these practices over time help us loosen the knots of the entanglement, see reality more clearly. And another essential aspect of this untangling is developing the right view that's talked about in the Eightfold Path. You will recall that right view involves understanding the true nature of things, the true nature of impermanence, the true nature of suffering, the true nature of non-self, what the Buddha called the three marks of existence. When we deeply internalize these truths, not just intellectually, but internalize them, we begin to see that the tangle itself, the tangles themselves, are illusions. The fears, the stories, the confusion that bind us are not intrinsic to reality. They are creations of the mind. By letting go of these attachments to these mental fabrications, to all these stories, we experience the freedom and peace that comes with unbinding and untangling ourselves. Another reason I love this metaphor is that it reminds us to approach our practice with patience and compassion. Untying a knot, think of a knotted shoelace, requires care and attention. If we pull too hard on it or we rush the process, we only tighten the knot. Similarly, on our spiritual path, we must be gentle with ourselves, recognizing that untangling the mind is a gradual process. It's not something we can rush. Each moment of mindfulness, each act of kindness, each insight into the nature of reality is a greater step toward freedom, is a greater step toward untangling. The suffering we feel is almost always rooted in how tangled up we are, in our fears, our unhelpful stories, and our self-created clouds of confusion. But the good news is, again, these tangles are not a life sentence. We have choices. Through the teachings and practice that the Buddha offered us, we learn to untie the knots, one by one, with compassion, without judgment, and free ourselves from the bounds of suffering. And this path to liberation begins with awareness. Again, we have to notice, we have to recognize when we're tangled up, when we're all knotted up, and then understand the causes and commit to working on untangling them. But when we do it, we uncover that innate clarity, that peace and freedom that lies at the very heart, the very peace, freedom, and clarity that the Buddha promised us. So many of us, so much of the world walks around all entangled, and boy, does the suffering follow. The untangling offers a freedom that is not bound by fears, not bound by stories, not bound by confusion, but grounded in the truth of the present moment. So that is some thoughts on Tangled Up.